squared away. Welcome. Good morning. Blessed Epiphany Sunday to you. So let's have some fun with the Epiphany story here a little bit. And then next week, we will start a new series. Invite friends, invite people that don't typically come to this, maybe, to include this in their Sunday morning. It's difficult faith questions, and those questions are in the beacon, the ones upcoming, and also on the website. And then you can email me additional questions that may merit us spending some time with. I'm doing this because, in my view, not just our young people, but people of every generation, especially our unchurched friends that we're talking about as a church trying to reach out to, have significant questions that are sometimes stumbling blocks to them even considering a faith life, and certainly Christianity, being part of a church community, getting connected to Christ. So the purpose of addressing these faith questions is not to try and change people's mind. I think that's something God the Holy Spirit does. But certainly, if we don't deal with those questions that they have that are stumbling blocks, then they're not going to be open. So the goal is, one, to help you with those questions, because a lot of us have the same questions. But then also to give you some talking points and some listening ability. And I'm going to use various resources. Bill's given me some good stuff, and I've got some other stuff of my own that I've gotten. To just, one, be able to listen to people with these difficult questions and offer them some things to think about. I think it's officially called apologetics, which means making a defense for the faith. But don't let that scare you off. I'm just really trying to help remove some stumbling blocks and help people realize that you can have those questions. A lot of us have them. And there are some answers that at least let you be open to the story of the Scriptures and the narrative of the Scriptures. So that is what we're going to do, because we're looking at connecting more people to Christ, breaking the barrier. And so that's supposed to dictate what we do as a congregation. And so that's what we'll do this winter for at least a couple months going forward from here. But as a transition, since this is Epiphany Sunday, I figured we'd spend some more time and go in more depth into the Epiphany story according to Matthew. How many days of Christmas are there? 12. Which lands, well, the 12th day was yesterday, I guess, right? Yep. And so today is the first day or the day of Epiphany. And then after this, we follow on in the season of Epiphany. Epiphany means revelation. I typically just use the definition this way. Aha. Oh, I get it. You see something. There was a guy, a horrible Greek ruler, who really oppressed the Judeans, the Jewish people. About 180 BC. His name was Antiochus Epiphanes. You hear Epiphanes. He called himself a revelation of God. That was his name. That's the name, Antiochus Epiphanes. So, for us, an epiphany is a revelation of who God is. And we start the season of Epiphany in the church here. Nuts. Before I talk. We start Epiphany season with the day of Epiphany, which we don't always get to celebrate because it's always January 6th. And then the first Sunday of Epiphany, which will be next week, the first bookend of this season of Epiphany is the baptism of Jesus. Oh. It might also be I screamed too loud yesterday. May have had something to do with that. sorry about this. So the baptism of Jesus is the first bookend. And what's the revelation we get? It's backwards. Okay. Happy New Year. So what's the revelation we get in the baptism of Jesus? Heavens are open, the dove comes down. What does the voice say? This is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased. Boom. Wow. Epiphany. You know what is the end bookend? The last bookend of the season of Epiphany. Fill her up. What's the last thing? What's the
Transfiguration
last thing
Sunday.
Does anybody get it?
Transfiguration Sunday.
Transfiguration Sunday. Jesus takes James, John, and Peter up on the mountain. He's transfigured before them. So that's the bookends of the season of Epiphany. Everything else are other epiphanies about who Jesus is. Like I'm pretty sure this year we have John and Jesus doing the miracle of the water into wine. Well, what is that? That's an epiphany. So just a little teaching on the liturgical church here, why we have it, how it works. And so now let's get into the actual story of Epiphany with the Magi. So we want to first, I referred to this a little bit in the sermon, we want to first understand what we might call honor stories and how they worked in the first century. They're called encomium, those of you who know Greek or whatever, encomium, and praise story, or progymnasmata. What do you see in that word? Progeny? What is progeny? It's like where, maybe? I think this is where you're from, your birth. Gym. That's your education. And gym, yeah. So in other words, yoga. So in the Mediterranean world, we have these records from the Greek and Roman culture. There were schools and classes that taught you how to properly write the story of someone who is famous. So someone who is of great honor. Well, when you write their story, you have to talk about their birth. You have to talk about where they're from. You have to talk about what was going on when they were born. Because all of that keeps up honor on that person. And so there is actual instruction on how to do this. And when we look at those instructions, we actually find that Matthew and Luke, but especially Matthew, kind of utilizes some of those elements. Now, we have no idea if Matthew had gone to that class or whatever, but you're in that culture, and so you're used to this, and you expect this. The Gospel of Mark, all you experts out there, what's unique about the Gospel of Mark and how it starts? Doesn't have a birth story. The beginning of the Gospel. Boom. John was in the wilderness. We don't even talk about his birth. Jesus grew up in Nazareth. What do you think about Nazareth? Is that a place to brag about? What's one of the biggest stumbling blocks people have with Jesus?
Didn't he good come out of Nazareth?
You got it, right. So, Matthew's writing Jesus' birth, writing his story. He says, we have to make sure people understand that this guy has a special beginning, because that would be dishonorable in his mind not to do so. I'm not saying that he made it up at all, but he made sure we know about some details that Mark didn't seem to be concerned about when he wrote his gospel. So the birthplace. We've got Bethlehem. We've got Magi coming to see him. And we will actually, the education part is not so much an issue at this stage in the game. Honors conveyed from origin and education. But also, part before the Epiphany story that we're going to read in just a minute is the genealogy. So how does Matthew begin his gospel? He just starts off with a genealogy. Wow, that's not a very exciting way to start off your story, but for Matthew, hey, this is essential. This is a royal person. This is not just a humanly royal person, but this is a divinely royal person. This is, so we're gonna be very detailed genealogy, going back to Abraham, and certainly walking through David, King David. So this is really important to him. And so with that, let's read a little bit. Let's read some of the story. I'll get over here. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men, or in the Greek magi, from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." In the time of King Herod, where is the child? I always thought that they went right to Herod and said, "Where's," which wouldn't make sense, would it? Why would you go and ask a king, "Where's the new king to be born?" That's kind of not very smart. These guys were pretty smart. They really just come, from the east to Jerusalem. "Where's the child who's been born?" So we observed his star. We want to pay him homage. King Herod hears about it, and he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet." And then we get a quote here. So we'll read that in just a second. Let's talk about Herod and what we know about him. We know that Herod killed a number of his children when he thought they were threatening his power. We know that Herod was a master politician in the sense that he had convinced the Roman emperors, because there were two during his time of power, that he was their guy. And he would rule Judea well, and got the Roman support so he could fight off the other Jewish people battling it out for control to be the king of the area. Even once the Romans had taken over, there were still power battles, of course. Wherever two or more gathered, there you have politics. So, and so you've got, I won't go into the nitty-gritty of it all. It's really interesting and fascinating, but there were wars and battles and fights and all kinds of complex things that went on for Herod to get to his point. But the really fascinating thing is Herod had supported one Roman leader, Caesar, and that one lost. I think that was Mark Antony. I can't remember. And then and so when you back the wrong horse, what happens to you? Well, he was able to convince the new Roman emperor, no, just as loyal to you I will be as the other one, and actually was successful in that, and was brave enough to go back to Rome and make his case and all of this. So he is amazing at his ability to work the system. And in addition to that, he's clearly paranoid, and a lot of people would say by today's standards he's insane, he's a murderer, etc. Although I think that was kind of the way things were done back then. Barb, yeah?
Would you call him a collaborator?
A collaborator. I think that's a good word, and that's certainly the way he would be viewed by the real devoted Jewish folks. He doesn't have the royal lineage. This is why I want to talk is look at what Matthew does with Jesus. And then Herod was a usurper. He was, and we'll get into some interesting passage in Numbers here in just a minute. So he was a collaborator. And yet, so he would have had a real love-hate wonders of the world. Just unbelievable what he did, which it wasn't even finished by the time he dies, but he starts that whole project, and he builds all of these amazing things. The aqueduct to Caesarea Maritima, that, with the Roman engineering, and it's still, a lot of it's still there to this day. I mean, how do you get, he gets fresh water to this port city of Caesarea, so much so that he has a built-in swimming pool on the ocean. It's the outline of it's still there today. I mean, like what's that place everybody goes for vacation? They advertise it on TV. Anyway, you see the pool sitting right there on the ocean. Well, Herod invented the concept. So so it's amazing what he built. Masada is what he built. He never went there. He had this huge palace in Bethlehem, actually. And the remains of all those things are still there. So Herod the Great, his legacy is still there. So amazing builder, but like I say, he was completely paranoid, killed wives, killed sons, and then what does he do right after this story? The slaughter of the innocents. So, and we might not get there today, but, so after this story, Herod has all the 2-year-old children, 2 years old and younger, murdered, killed in Bethlehem. This is also why, most likely, the Magi didn't come when the shepherds came. I know it works for our nativity scenes, but, and I love the recent movie, or a few years back, called Nativity. But man, they just had to bring those wise men in there with the shepherds. They just had to do it. There's no way they were there on the night Jesus was born. That's not the way it worked. I don't think. Although we've got the star, but we kind of converge the two stories of Luke and Matthew. The reason Herod has 2 years and under is that I don't want to miss any of it. So it's very likely that but we don't know when they came. I suppose it's possible they came the night he was born, but most likely it was later. That's neither here nor there. So this is the kind of guy Herod is. He's threatened by these wise men showing up. So they show up in Jerusalem. Herod freaks out.
Pastor Bill.
Yes, please.
Well, it says that all Jerusalem with him was frightened. Why?
Yes, heard this. He was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. That's a great question. Thank you for pointing that out. Let's see. I think I have a thought of my own. Why do you think Jerusalem would be worried? Because of what Herod might do? Yeah. It would upset Betty. It upset the status quo. Yeah, King Herod was safe. He had made the deal. Romans are going to leave us alone. We're going to do our thing. We're under their control. But there's going to be a king. Oh no, a real king? Not like this. What is that going to mean? That's going to mean conflict. That's going to mean fighting, war, etc.
The Jews would be the cheese.
What's that?
The Jews would be a cheese between the two.
Well, sure. So we're going to get caught in the big fight, the big power battle. Yep. So that's a great question. That's what I think. But what else would you say? Yeah.
Well, I just had a question.
Yeah.
I know in this time it was tribes. We talked about the northern tribes. Would Jerusalem be all Jew?
Yes. Jerusalem would have been all, well, John's question was, would Jerusalem be all Jewish? There were Roman soldiers, there were Roman leaders, there were, Jerusalem, the interesting thing is, it was Hellenized, so the Greek culture had, we got this big overlap between Greek and Jewish culture, so you got these cultures going on, but Jerusalem would have been very much Jewish. And remember where the term Jew comes from. You had 10 northern tribes. They get wiped away. They're what's called Israel. And they get wiped away by the Assyrians. Then the Babylonians come, because the only two left are Judah and Benjamin. And really, Benjamin was just a small little, tribe, so to speak. And so Judah was really all that was left. Well, that's where the term comes from. So when they come back from exile, that's when they start to be called Jews. And so, Jerusalem would be a very Jewish, that's the stronghold. But you never escape that Hellenizing Greek,
And all of them religious. I guess my point being, like in Israel today.
Yeah, well,
non-Jews that are.
all of them religious. I would say that it would be accurate to say that the temple sacrifices and participation in synagogue was a part of the fabric of their lives. Very much so. How religious each and every person was, and Judaism, as we've talked about in classes past, was, there were at least four different groups, denominations. The Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and then maybe Zealots, the folks that wanted a physical, So all of those things and more were going on, so it was somewhat complex. But so yeah, Jerusalem's in an uproar to hear this. And yeah, please.
There's a 28-year gap between the birth story and the ministry.
Right.
And basically, why was anybody paying attention to anything in between? And what brought the two stories together?
Kevin's question was, what about the gap between when Jesus is born and when he starts his ministry? I think there's a lot of uproar and interest in, wow, who's this king to be born? Herod kills all the 2-year-old kids, and Joseph's warned in a dream to flee to Egypt, and I think he gets forgotten about. I think Jesus just gets completely forgotten about. And again, I know inquiring minds always want to know. We want to know what happened in those 28 years of Jesus' life before he starts his public ministry. And the only story we have is from the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus heads off to the temple for Passover, I think it was Passover, celebration, and his family leaves afterwards, and they realize on the way back, where's Jesus? we left our kid in Jerusalem. They flee back, and where do they find him? He's in the temple, and Jesus says, where else would I be but in my Father's house? So that's what we know, and then Luke tells us Jesus grew in wisdom and stature with God and man, or human beings. So that's what we know. And my view of why we don't know more, why the gap, is there was just nothing spectacular about it to take notice of. Jesus was an ordinary guy, saved for sin. I'm not saying that he wasn't without sin, but you wouldn't, later on we have all these infancy gospels that has the little boy Jesus touching things and healing things and doing all kinds of miracles. Those are, not books that the church ever felt were authoritative and true, and they're really bizarre. But, people wrote them. They exist. Jesus as a schoolboy, giving a little bird life and all this stuff. All of this. So, but I think it was very normal. So, I think people forgot about it. Forgot about this particular guy, about Jesus necessarily. He goes to Egypt, and then he comes back, and he lives in Nazareth. Again, back to nowhere. And then once he starts his public ministry, then things get going. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
How was the story of this retained until the Gospels were written?
Yeah, well, so Kevin's question is, how was the story of this birth retained until the Gospels were written? Some ultra-critical scholars would say this is not historical. They would say Matthew did this to show honor to Jesus and, fluffed up this big birth story. I think that's an unnecessary thing. I think both in the case of the Gospel of Luke with the shepherds and, the angels and the shepherds and all of that, Luke says, I went out and interviewed people. So he went and, did that. Matthew, being a very Jewish gospel, has a concern that maybe Mark didn't when it comes to the birth. And so he did his work and investigation. And so, you know, I just, knowing Middle Eastern culture, I'm not an expert in it, but knowing how they tell stories and things were passed on, I think this is clearly a tradition that, you know, was probably in the oral tradition that Matthew, you know, brings up. Yep.
In the gospel, it mentions that Mary held all these early...
Yes, pondered things in her heart.
So it's very possible she passed this all on.
Yeah, yeah, right, yep. And that's what I think we can take a lot of confidence in that, yep.
You know, as we read biographies of people
Yeah.
nowadays, famous people, let's say, so you're going to write a biography, you're going to go back and start, you'll ask questions.
Yes.
On their hometown, where was his hometown?
Right.
What do you do? That sort of stuff. And then you don't talk very much about being then, and then you became famous.
Right.
That's typical about biography.
Yeah. So Burr was just mentioning that, you know, if with someone famous, yeah, you tell about their birth and stuff, but until they become famous, you know, you don't necessarily always get that much information. So yeah, that's helpful too. So yeah, Kevin, it's great, and I really think this was part of the oral tradition and the storytelling, and Matthew did his research, and it was important to his audience, and that's why he gets it in there. Whereas maybe for others, it wouldn't have been as big of a thing to take note of. John, you know, John comes at it differently. He does this hymn about the Word made flesh, and that's his birth story. So it's interesting. Yes.
How did the Magi then hear about his birth? Or,
Yeah.
or
Right.
they saw the star, but how did they know?
Well,
And
that's,
where were they? They were from the east, so
where were they from? All of that. All right, that's a perfect transition. So let's keep going here. And we'll finish the little bit of the story, and then we'll delve into these magi and what they're about, and the star and all that good stuff. So they told him, yeah, how did they know? In Bethlehem of Judea, for it so it has been written by the prophet. So they're telling Herod Jewish scripture. I'm sorry. Oh, the other people, sorry. He inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. No, but this is the Magi, right? Talking. Yeah.
Right.
Down just a little further.
When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. He called together all the chief priests and scribes of the people. He inquired of them. Okay, so he's not talking to the Magi. Thank you. Was to be born. They told him in Bethlehem and Judah, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. That's almost an exact quote, but in Micah, in the Hebrew, it says, Bethlehem, land of Judah, you're one of the little tribes of Judah. But this quote says, you're by no means little amongst. Anyway, so... But it does say, from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel. So then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. So what Matthew's telling us, the Magi, they were the astrologer folks. They were looking to the stars. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring the word, so that I may go and pay him homage. There's a lot of debate about, you know, this word is a word of worship and bowing down. Can you imagine Herod bowing down to anyone other than the Caesar? When they had heard the king, they sent out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road or another way. All right, so there's the story. What do we know about these wise men? Let's see, we got all that. So, let's talk about these visitors. So if they come from the east, that would most likely be Persia, Tigris, Euphrates River, you know, and we know that there was a lot of astrology going on, looking at the stars. People believed that the stars were not, they didn't know what they were, obviously. They didn't know they were, you know, all these different suns out there, and sun, S-U-Ns. But they actually sometimes would talk about them as beings even. And so that's why they studied them. And there were all kinds of omens and things that were done with comets. They you know, this was a bad omen, this was good. So these people were professional folks that were looking to the stars. But I think we have to also hold out, and answering your question, Audrey, that they knew of the Jewish scriptures. Remember, the Jews spent a lot of time in Babylon, Persia, and then, you know, in that Mesopotamian area there. They spent a lot of time there. And not all of the Jewish people returned when they came back from exile. If you read the book of Daniel, you know, how do you live in a, you know, so we know that there was a strong Jewish influence there, and I can't imagine that the Magi were not educated in some of the writings as well. But they're looking at the stars, and then, you know, I think that they're probably also in touch with a lot of different religious things, which actually we'll look at here, in fact. Yeah, I want to just get past that. So, in fact, we have some documentation from the Roman writings that, and this is from a historian a little bit after the time of Jesus, but there had spread over all the Orient an old and established belief that it was fated at that time for men coming from Judea to rule the world. So there was this talk, you know, where it comes from, you know, partly the Jewish scripture, but then, you know, in all of the Orient, that there would be, you know, all the world would become ruled by men or people from Judea. That's from the Roman side. That's not a religious text. That's just, so there was a concern out there. So, and then when we look at Josephus, let's see, I think I've got Josephus on my deal here. Where are you, Josephus? No, that's Christians. This is it.
Josephus is.
Okay, yep, thank you. Josephus is a Jewish historian at later than Jesus, just a little bit. And he kind of is viewed by the Jews of his day as a traitor because he collaborates with the Romans. But that's why he survives. And so he is our only extra biblical source of the destruction of Jerusalem, of, you know, the Roman invasion and everything that happens after that. So he says this in the Jewish Wars, and he says, "Now, if anyone consider these things, he will find that God takes care of mankind, humankind, and by all ways possible foreshadows to our race what is for their preservation." So when he says our race, let's see what is he's talking about, the Jewish people or just all people in general. "But that men perish by those miseries which they madly and voluntarily bring upon themselves. For the Jews, by demolishing the Tower of Antonia," I don't know what that is, but it was, you know, the Zealots, they're going to take on the Romans, so that's some event there, "had made their temple foursquare, while at the same time they had it written in their sacred oracles," and this is the part I want you to take note, "that then should their city be taken as well as their holy house, when once their temple should become foursquare." Hang in there. Hold on. "But now, what did most elevate them in undertaking this war was an ambiguous oracle that was also found in their sacred writings, and then, quote, about that time, one from their country should become governor of the habitable earth. Now, I'm not sure we know what writing is being talked about here, but what Josephus is saying is that the reason the Jews got all, we're going to take on the Romans, was because their sacred writings said, you're going to rule. And someone from your, is going to be in charge of the world. So this spurred them on, in Josephus' view, to do this foolish revolt against the Romans, which is why they came into such calamity. Why do I tell you this? I tell you this to say that the concept of magi coming from the east to hear about a king being born makes some sense. I mean, there was talk about a Messiah. There was talk about people from Judea ruling even all the earth. And so these magi, it's not inconceivable that they would actually come. They're looking. What's going on? They're curious. They're wanting to see this. And so we also hear later on that magi visit Rome and some other places after the time of Jesus who come. So even though it's not before Jesus, so we see that these folks were out there searching and looking. So even after Jesus, we hear some magi mentioned. Does that make sense? So how did they know, Audrey? We have this star, and it gets their attention. And books have been written. I read another one just recently about whether trying to explain. We can go back with what we know about the stars and etc. to say, well, Halley's Comet would have been going at this time, and Jupiter and Venus were, or not, Jupiter and Mars, I guess, or whatever, were, converging, or whatever you call that. And so it could have been a supernova, so then we look at, and people, debate that. I've always wondered, well, boy, how can a star in the sky, you can see it lead them to the west, but then how does it lead them right to Bethlehem? So that's where, for me, it's just, it's kind of foolish to try and understand it to be a natural occurrence. I mean, I'm not saying, I don't know how it was done, but, anyway. Yeah, Bart.
Why did Joseph hang around Bethlehem after the baby was born? Why did Joseph hang around with the family in Bethlehem?
Why did he hang around? That was his hometown. So, and that's why, according to Luke, not Matthew, but according to Luke, for Matthew, the reason Jesus is born in Bethlehem is that's where the Savior comes from. But for, Luke tells us that the reason they went there, because they're from Nazareth, that's his hometown. That's Matthew's hometown. So he's sticking around with family for we don't know how long. But then he gets this dream, Herod's coming, so you got to get out of here, and then they head off to Egypt. So he doesn't even go to Nazareth, to Mary's place, where she was, but he heads off to Egypt. So that's why they're still there, is they're with family and, this type of thing. Now, why would they be there for 2 years? I don't know. But, but certainly for the 12 days of Christmas. But it possibly much longer. That's a great question. All right, so yes, a star, Halley's Comet, a supernova conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. There you go, not Mars. So, and then I want to do a little background with Herod. Yeah, please, Alan.
Back to the start real quick. Why weren't other people following this stuff? Only a select few actually seeing it.
Yeah, why weren't other people following this particular star? Yeah.
Seems pretty obvious.
Yeah, if this was, something that was there for all the world to see, why wouldn't, everybody be like, oh, what's going on? That's a great question.
The Magi had better publicists,
The Magi have what?
better press.
Better press.
There you go.
Yeah.
There may have been other people, but they weren't pertinent to the story,
Yeah, yeah. And there are writers, I read commentaries, well, this was a revelation just to the Magi, and they only saw it. But, Matthew just is very content with letting us Stu about those questions. And he doesn't go into with any more detail, so, yeah. There's some really interesting stuff here then with Herod and his paranoia. And I want to go to Numbers 24:17, passage that I know all of you guys know by heart. So you've heard of, you might have in the back of your mind remember Balaam and the donkey. And so this is when the people of Israel, they're wandering in the land, and now they're starting to come into the land. They're making their way, and now they're in the, like in Moab, which is north. Think of Sea of Galilee, Dead Sea, you know, up north. So they're getting closer, and the peoples of these areas are fighting them, and they're scared of them, and there's battles starting to happen. It's at the end of the book of Numbers, and Balaam is called upon by this guy named Balak to curse the leader, this leader of, you know, feudal king kind of the area that the Israelites are coming towards. Balak, he's, isn't the guy named in Raiders of the Lost Ark called Balak? Yeah, that's right. Anyway, never mind. That's, sorry. My brain just went. That's probably, they get all this stuff in the Bible, one way or the other. So anyway, this guy named Balak calls on Balaam, this you know, sorcerer or prophet, whatever, to curse Israel so that he won't lose his land to this invading people. And so you've got all these oracles. But Balaam ultimately doesn't do it because he fears the Lord, and God speaks to him and he doesn't curse them. So he has all these oracles, and they're kind of weird and interesting, but this is one of those. The oracle of one who hears the words of God and knows the knowledge of the Most High, who sees the vision of the Almighty, who falls down, but with his eyes uncovered. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the borderlands of Moab, and the territory of the Shephites. Edom will become a possession, Seir a possession of its enemies, while Israel does valiantly. All right. Now, that's like, you're just like, okay, what's the big deal? So, here's the interesting thing. Herod is an Idumean, or an Edomite. So he is kind of a half-Jew, but he comes from this area. So here's this, you know, old prophecy, this old oracle that, you know, a star, going back to it, a star shall come out of Jacob. Now, where's Jacob? Jacob's the south. Jacob is Judah. I mean, that's they talk about Jacob and Israel, but you know, so it. You know, anyway, so all I'm trying to say is, man, if Herod had any kind of counsel who knew the Jewish scriptures, he would even be doubly paranoid, because we hear about this star that's going to dispossess, you know, the Edomites. Anyway, that's just kind of a fun. Aren't you excited that so, yeah. There's a description, Ignatius has who's a first century Christian martyr. He dies around 108 A.D., a bishop, and he lives a long, long life. But so he's a fascinating, great person to investigate church history. But nonetheless, he talks about this star. Let me just, well, I don't think we have, you know, he refers to it, he talks about it, and it's interesting. Well, maybe, where else do you have to go? Right? Let's see. Here we go. So this is from Ignatius. How then was he made known to the eons? A star shone forth in the heaven above all the stars, and its light was unutterable, and its strangeness caused amazement, and all the rest of the constellations with the sun and the moon formed themselves into a chorus about the star. But the star itself far outshone them all, and there was perplexity to know whence came this strange appearance, which was so unlike them. So this is, again, 70 years or so after, but pretty recent. And so this gets a little bit to Alan, your question, and so he's now, there's a tradition where he's describing, the star. From that time forward, but now so this is very not so unlike Matthew, but now this is kind of interesting. From that time forward, every sorcery and every spell was dissolved. The ignorance of the wickedness vanished away, and the ancient kingdom was pulled down when God appeared in the likeness of man unto newness of everlasting life. And that which had been perfected in the counsels of God began to take effect. Thence all things were perturbed because the abolishing of death was taken in hand. So this is, these are things that are connected with Jesus' birth, with the incarnation. Every spell was dissolved. The ignorance of and wickedness vanished away. The ancient kingdom was pulled down. What's being talked about here? And the best I can tell you is that Ignatius believed that there was the cosmic realm and then the earthly realm. And in the cosmic realm, when this happens, all this curse was broken and the spell was broken. But on the earth, let's see, it says, began to take effect. So that which is perfected in the counsels of God in the heavens, in the heavenly realm, now starts to take effect here. Kind of like Jesus said, thy will be done on earth as in heaven. It's interesting. But anyway, I just wanted you to know, Ignatius, being martyred as an old man, about 108 AD, talks about the star. So there you go, Kevin. There's another source for the star. So, all right, all of that is interesting. What do we do with the story today? This was I wanted you to just delve into some more stuff biblically and exegetically, but I don't know. Let's do the second question here. Is our world different than that world? How is it different and how is it the same? When you think about the characters, you got Herod, you got the Romans, you got the Jewish people struggling and looking, and star comes, and you've got this. How is it similar? How is it the same? I've got a microphone. Anybody want to tackle that?
I think a lot of, especially evangelical Christians, are looking for signs, natural signs of the world.
Yes.
And there's a lot of Old Testament scripture that points to that as well. So.
Yes. So what about the signs? Yes. Are we still looking for signs and wonders? Is that still a part of it? You've got the book of Revelation that gives us lots of things to play with, and lots of material to write books about. And so, yeah. Are there still going to be more signs to come? I don't know. How's the world similar? How's the world different? Can you run that back to Barbara? Now that we're going to talk a little more, that way I don't have to just repeat so everybody can hear. Yeah, I think I'll turn this up. Yep.
Betty mentioned,
It's on. Yep.
Betty mentioned that people in Jerusalem didn't want the status quo upset. And I think that in our lives, as common people, we don't want the status quo upset. Better the evil that we know. So I think that we're still living under the rule of Herod.
Yeah.
People after material things,
Yes.
money, power,
Yeah.
but we know how to live in that. We're kind of afraid because we don't want that upset.
Yeah. What will it mean for me? Yeah. No, that's. I think there's a lot to that. I think that Jesus' kingship is just as subtle and hidden today as it was then for me. And his rule, because his rule was different than the Herod's kind of rule. So, yeah. But it's there, and it's more powerful, even though it's more subtle. Paul says God chose what is weak in the world to shame the wise, God's wisdom, you know. So that whole hiddenness of God in the midst of all the struggles. Yeah, good. Say some more. What else? Yeah. Yeah, please, Sue.
Well,
Hold on. He's coming. Yeah.
The thought just came to me that they were waiting for the Messiah.
Yeah.
We are waiting for the Messiah to come again.
Yes. Interesting. Yes, good.
And we have a responsibility to live so that we can be the light.
Yes. Yeah. So the difference is that they were looking for the first appearing, and we're waiting for the second. Yeah.
They were pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Things are the same.
Yeah, the same, there's a lot of same realities. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Good, good. Yeah, right here, sorry. Yeah.
Well, the power centers of the world increased in our awareness and increased in fact, and they're all over the world now. And there are no governments that can get it right.
Right.
We're always working, trying to get it right.
Yes.
But they're dispersed, and so we have more than one power center running the show.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I love what you said, no government gets it exactly right. You know, I mean, I think one of the lessons is you look at Herod, who was, of course, insane and horrible, you know, but Rome and all that, all those folks are gone. You know, it's just rubble now, like I mentioned in the sermon. And governments can be much better than others, and there's better systems than others, but they're all fallible and not perfect. Not perfect. And that's why I think Jesus' reign and kingdom is something that's, you know, Jesus would say to Pilate, my kingdom is not of this world, or, you know, it's not that it isn't in the world, and it involves every part of the world, but it's beyond that. And I think that brings me a lot of hope. But yeah. And then, so I guess what am I trying to get at here? I think we don't have to despair in the midst of all the earthly power battles. It's the way it is. It's not that it's open. We got to try and be ethical. We got to be the light too in the world. We got to try and do a lot. But even in the church, there's politics and struggles and people who want to get their opinion. You know, there's winners and losers. No matter how we talk about it, there's winners and losers to everything, and so those realities are ever present. And sometimes we can kind of throw up our hands. But for me, when I hear this story of Jesus right alongside the earthly powers hidden in the midst of it, the epiphany of that is, hey, God is still at work even though all those other realities are going on too. And we have to, you know, not be, it's easy to be cynical, but knowing that, we keep fighting. Yeah, please.
Because even though we're in the infancy, science is painstakingly replacing belief with fact.
Yeah.
And we're very early in that process, but
yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Difference.
We're going to talk about that question. Is science, pushing out the space that God used to take? The whole gaps. We used to, as human beings, anything we couldn't explain, we just said it's God. But now we can explain a lot more. So so we're going to talk about that a little more. But yeah, that's the other thing, though, is the more we know, the more we don't. So, yeah. Oh, good. Yeah, please, Kim.
I remember reading an article that said many of the evangelicals hope that our president will bring about the apocalypse, the second coming of Christ.
Yeah. I suppose there are some Christian Zionists. Hopefully not all the evangelicals believe that or teach that. But yeah, there is a viewpoint that not just our current president, but the United States is going to be an essential partner with Israel in rebuilding the temple, which will then cause Armageddon and usher in that second coming. think that's a little Herodish to me, taking control. The other problem with it is, and again, we talked about this a lot. I think, didn't we talk about this last week? About the current nation of Israel and stuff? Maybe I've just had so many conversations, I can't when I've talked about it. But when it comes to those signs, I think there's a real question about current modern day Israel. Is it biblical Israel? And does the Bible teach that there will be a rebirth of the nation of Israel? And that's an open question. I'm not telling you one way or the other. I'm just saying I struggle with it theologically and biblically, because as I read all four Gospels, as I read the New Testament, Jesus is the fulfillment. He is, He's the way God saved the world. He is the pinnacle. So, God's use of the nation of Israel was leading up to Jesus. That God isn't creating a new nation to, okay, we got Jesus, but now we also need the physical Israel back. And now that's going to be the... Now, before you get too freaked out about me saying that, I think Israel is an incredibly important nation. I think we can never allow what happened to the Jewish people to happen again. And they need a nation. And we need to know that they live in a place where lots of people want them to be dead and to be gone. And our country needs to support Israel. But I think we support them for reasons of justice and, keeping the Holocaust from happening ever again. And not because it's biblical Israel. And just in case you're wondering, biblical Israel is a monarchy and a theocracy. Is modern Israel a theocracy? It's a democracy, just like ours. I mean, but a lot of people hear me say that and say I'm being anti-Semitic. I'm not. I think I'm it's very complex, but it's a nation, just like our nation. And are we going to go by God's laws or not? And Israel's very diverse, and actually it's just as secular as the United States, if not more. I mean, if you haven't been there, you should know that. And actually the most ultra-Orthodox Jewish folks, the people at the Wailing Wall with the black hats and the black clothes, they are a small minority. And they don't even acknowledge the legitimacy of the nation of Israel, because it's not the biblical nation. It's a democracy. They don't even acknowledge it, even though isn't that ironic? And it's ironic because they're subsidized completely by the Jewish government. They don't work, they don't have jobs. And that's a big controversy in Israel right now. So anyway, long story short, and then Bill, I see your hand, and when it comes to signs and wonders, I think we have to be careful and try and be balanced when it comes to Israel. We don't want to just give them a pass, but we don't want to be over, But there are, even going back to Ken's comments, yes, there are Zionist Christians who believe that the modern day Israel is biblical Israel, and it's an essential part of the plan of the book of Revelation and Armageddon and all of that. And I just think that's a big question mark to me. I don't have confidence in that. But that doesn't make me anti-Semitic. I think Israel's important, and I think you have to hear their side, you have to hear the side of the Arabs or the Palestinians. I think it's just a tough situation. Bill, you had a comment, and then one more. Yeah. We got a mic somewhere else.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I think this one works. Yeah.
Just a point concerning the science. Over the recent history of all the things they're discovering about the universe and its start, amazing correlation between stuff that was already laid out in the Bible, written by people that were,
Not
inspired.
Yeah, right.
And it was incredible insight into how it all happened in the right sequence.
Yeah.
And one of the books in the library in there, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, lays this out in exceptional detail, particularly pointing out the incredible fine-tuning.
Yeah.
And how unique our Earth, our solar system is in the whole universe.
Yep.
And just, the chance that,
That this was an
they're
accident.
finding, it doesn't look like there are other places out there with other sentient beings.
Haven't found Yeah, and we're gonna talk some more about that in this upcoming faith questions. One more, Tim, and then we've gotta close up.
I was just thinking about the parallels of expectation between, you know, what they were expecting in the Messiah was a Davidic king that would, like a political king that would
Yes.
save them from the Romans. And I think we have a lot of expectation of our government to be ethical and moral, and,
Yeah,
you know, we put our expectation every time we vote for a president, you know.
yeah,
what
they're
we
gonna
think
fix
will
all the
happen.
world
So we
problems.
have kind of a parallel expectation and a governmental expectation,
Yeah,
and then also, you know, we know what the real Messiah means too. So.
right. Oh, excellent, that's great. Yeah, I'm always amazed at how well, maybe it's on the positive side, it's very hopeful that we listen to some of our presidential candidates. I'm not talking about the current, I'm talking going way back, forever. I'm not talking about the current constellation. And we just like, yes, they're gonna bring about, they're gonna make the world, you know, we really believe that, don't we? So, I mean, and it's, you know, and I'm not saying they can't make it better or worse, I think leadership is so important, but it's also like, you know, it's gonna always be broken. We're always gonna have trade-offs, and but thanks be to God, we have another king in the midst of it, that his reign is forever, and part of this world, but not necessarily of it. Anyway, all right. Hey, love wrestling with the Epiphany story with you today. And go forth and be a light. We'll see you next week. Check out your weekend and the website for questions that we're going to do each week.